The look on my daughter's face when I slid the property deed across the table was worth every single day I spent in that nursing home. "But Mom," she stammered, "how could you possibly own Riverside Towers?" That's when I knew I had her. The same daughter who'd convinced my own grandson I was losing my mind, just to get me out of the way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Winters. At 72, I've lived through enough to know that life's greatest betrayals often come wrapped in the sweetest smiles. For nearly 4 decades, I taught mathematics at Westridge High School, shaping young minds, while carefully building my own financial security. My late husband, Robert, had always emphasized one thing. "Ellie, never let anyone, not even family, know exactly what you have." I dismissed his paranoia back then. After all, what kind of daughter would ever see her mother as nothing more than a balance sheet? I'd soon learn the answer to that question. My retirement brought a modest pension of $3,200 monthly, comfortable enough in our mid-sized Midwestern city of Lakewood. My needs were simple: tending to my garden where I grew prize-winning dahlias, attending my book club every Thursday, and spending weekends with my daughter Catherine's family. My grandson Miles had just turned 16, a bright boy with his grandfather's gentle eyes and curious mind. My 3-bedroom colonial home on Maple Street wasn't extravagant, but it was paid off and filled with 46 years of memories. The creaking third stair, the window seat where I'd read Catherine bedtime stories, the kitchen table where Robert and I had shared thousands of morning coffees. Every corner held pieces of my history. "Mom, I worry about you all alone in this big house," Catherine started saying around my 70th birthday. At first, I thought nothing of it. Daughters worry, and I'd worried about my own mother once upon a time. But then came the suggestions. "Mom, did you forget to take your medication again?" she'd ask, though my pill organizer clearly showed I hadn't missed a dose. "Mom, did you leave the stove on all night?" Mrs. Peterson next door called me concerned. But Mrs. Peterson later seemed confused when I thanked her for her vigilance. "Mom, have you noticed you're repeating yourself lately?" Catherine would say, though I knew perfectly well I wasn't. Little instances, carefully crafted and sprinkled, through our conversations like breadcrumbs leading somewhere dark. I couldn't understand why until I overheard Catherine on the phone one evening while she thought I was napping in the sunroom. "The property values on Maple Street are going through the roof," she whispered urgently. "If we wait much longer, we'll miss the market peak. Dr. Stevens already agreed to write the cognitive assessment we need. I've found the perfect facility, Lakeside Gardens. It's basic but clean. And the best part? Medicare covers most of it, which means we can use her pension to clear the upgrades on the house before we sell." My teacup nearly slipped from my fingers. My daughter, my only child whom I'd nursed through chickenpox and heartbreaks, whose college education I'd worked second jobs to fund, was plotting to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, and my home liquidated for her benefit. That night, I stared at the ceiling, remembering Robert's warnings. How had he known? The real betrayal wasn't just Catherine's plan. It was realizing I'd failed to see her clearly for perhaps my entire life. I didn't confront her. A lifetime of teaching teenagers had taught me that sometimes the most powerful lesson comes when you allow someone to follow their plan to its natural conclusion. Besides, I had preparations of my own to make. Within 3 weeks, Catherine arrived with Dr. Stevens, her tennis partner's husband, I later learned, who subjected me to a battery of questions. I noticed how he recorded my occasional hesitations, but ignored my perfect recall of details. The assessment was as fair as a rigged scale. "Mrs. Winters, I'm concerned about your cognitive function," he pronounced gravely. "For your safety, I recommend assisted living with full-time supervision." Catherine dabbed tears that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Mom, we'll find you somewhere nice, I promise." "Lakeside Gardens?" I asked quietly. Her surprise was brief but telling. "How did you—" "Just a guess. I replied. You've always liked lakeside views. 2 days later, Catherine and her husband Paul helped me pack just the essentials. Family photos were deemed too fragile for my new accommodations. My jewelry box, containing my mother's pearls and Robert's watch, was safer in Catherine's keeping. Even my gardening books were unnecessary clutter. I watched them dismantle my life with surgical precision, taking only what I had carefully planned to bring. The movers Catherine hired were efficient, transforming 46 years into 4 cardboard boxes in under 3 hours. Lakeside Gardens was nothing like its brochure. The lakeside view was of a stagnant retention pond, green with algae. The gardens consisted of a few withered petunias in concrete planters. My private suite was a 180-square-foot room with institutional beige walls, shared with a roommate who shouted at shadows. It's just temporary, Mom, Catherine promised, not quite meeting my eyes. Just until we get the house ready to sell. Then we'll find somewhere nicer. I smiled, patted her hand, and said what she needed to hear. I understand, dear. You know what's best. As Catherine and Paul hurried away, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out the one thing I'd insisted on bringing, my battered leather planner. Inside, where Catherine had never bothered to look, was a safety deposit box key and a business card for Morello and Associates, attorneys at law. When the door closed behind my daughter, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the planner to the notes section and added another tally mark under days until revelation 90. The nursing home routine was designed to infantilize. Wake-up calls at 5:30 a.m. Medications distributed whether needed or not. Meals that tasted of nothing served on plastic trays. Activities consisting of bingo and creating pipe cleaner crafts, as if decades of intellectual capacity had evaporated upon admission. My roommate Gladys alternated between periods of clarity and confusion. During the former, she revealed herself as a retired librarian with a wicked sense of humor. They think we're already dead, she whispered one night. That's why they don't bother making the food taste like anything. I found allies in unexpected places. Nurse Tamika slipped me real coffee from the staff lounge. Orderly James sneaked in crossword puzzle books when he saw me solving the facility's puzzles in minutes. Janitor Luis had a cell phone I could borrow during his breaks to make private calls. Catherine visited every Sunday for exactly 55 minutes, leaving promptly before the cafeteria began serving dinner. She brought updates on the house. The renovations are coming along beautifully. Miles, he's so busy with sports he barely notices you're gone. And my former garden. We had to remove those old dahlias, but the new landscaping looks much more modern. Each visit, she'd bring a document requiring my signature. Medical releases, insurance forms, permission to access accounts. I signed them all with the docile compliance she expected, watching her tuck them away with poorly concealed triumph. How long until the house is sold? I asked on her 8th visit. Oh, the market's a bit slower than expected, she hedged. But we've got an interested buyer. Another few weeks, maybe. What Catherine didn't know, what she'd never bothered to discover, was that every Tuesday for the past 20 years, I'd taken the bus downtown claiming to attend my book club. In reality, I met with my investment manager, Leon Friedman. 1 month into my nursing home stay, Leon visited me, posing as my cousin. We sat in the facility's courtyard, far from prying ears. It's all proceeding as you requested, Eleanor, he confirmed. The Riverside Towers acquisition completed last month through the Shell Corporation. Your daughter's mortgage has been transferred to our holding company. And she has no idea? None. The notification letters will go out exactly when you specified. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and heartbreak. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And the other arrangements? Your new apartment at the Monarch is ready whenever you are. The trust for Miles's education is ironclad. Catherine cannot touch it even if she discovers its existence. I watched a pair of sparrows building, a nest in the courtyard's single scraggly tree. Even here, life continued, adapted, found purpose. 90 days, I said softly. Not a day sooner or later. Leon nodded, understanding the weight of my decision. 90 days gives them enough. Rope. That evening, as I helped Gladys arrange her collection of plastic fruit, her prized possessions, she studied my face with surprising lucidity. "You're planning something," she declared. "I can tell. You don't have the same dead eyes as the rest of us," I smiled. "Let's just say I believe in delayed consequences." "Good," she cackled. "Nothing better than a well-executed revenge. Can I watch when it happens?" "Front row seat," I promised. Days at Lakeside Gardens blurred together by design. The monotony was a form of control, without variation, without stimulation. The mind gradually surrenders to apathy. I fought against it by creating secret routines. I solved differential equations in my head during morning medications. I composed poetry during afternoon crafts. I mentally redesigned gardens during the blaring evening television programs. Catherine's visits became less frequent, every other Sunday, then once a month. Her excuses grew more elaborate. Miles had tournaments, Paul had work commitments, the house renovations required supervision. On her 5th month of absence, she arrived with a thick envelope. "Just some final paperwork for the house sale," she explained. "The buyers are eager to close." I noticed she wore new diamond earrings and had the polished look of someone who'd recently visited an expensive spa. My pension checks, which should have been accumulating for my care beyond what Medicare covered, had clearly found another purpose. "All these forms," I sighed, playing my role. "What exactly am I signing?" "Just standard closing documents, Mom," she said impatiently. "The buyers need confirmation you're transferring all rights to the property." I pretended to squint at the papers. "My eyes aren't what they used to be. Could you summarize each one before I sign?" Catherine's irritation flashed briefly before her practiced smile returned. "Of course, Mom. This first one is just acknowledging the sale price of $450,000. The house was worth at least $650,000 in the current market. I wondered if the difference was disappearing into my daughter's pocket, or if she'd found a buyer who would flip the property immediately. I signed every document with careful penmanship, nothing like the shaky hand Catherine had come to expect. She was too focused on the signatures to notice. "When will I see my portion of the sale?" I asked innocently. Catherine's smile tightened. "Well, Mom, after paying off the remaining mortgage, the home equity loan we took for your medical expenses, and setting aside funds for your continued care here, there isn't much left. But don't worry, we're managing everything." There was no remaining mortgage. I'd paid it off 10 years ago. There were no medical expenses beyond what my insurance covered. These were convenient fictions. "I understand," I said, patting her hand. "You know best." As she gathered the signed documents, I asked, "How are things at the new apartment? Riverside Towers, right?" Miles mentioned it when he called. Miles hadn't called. He hadn't been permitted to. Catherine froze momentarily. "It's wonderful. The perfect location, and the investment potential is excellent." "Smart move," I nodded. "Property is always a good investment." She left with promises to visit again soon, promises we both knew were empty. That night, I updated my planner. Days until Revelation 5. The final pieces fell into place with precision that would have made Robert proud. Leon confirmed that Catherine and Paul had closed on my house, depositing the full amount into their personal accounts, rather than any trust for my care. They had also missed their first mortgage payment on their luxury apartment at Riverside Towers, sending a letter contesting the new ownership notification as obviously fraudulent. Gladys helped me dress for my departure day. Despite her periodic confusion, Her fingers were steady as she fastened my pearl necklace. Not the costume one Catherine had left me, but my real pearls that Nurse Tamika had retrieved from my safety deposit box. "You look like you again," Gladys declared, stepping back to admire the transformation. Gone was the shapeless facility-issued sweatsuit. In its place, a tailored navy dress, low heels, and a light application of makeup. My white hair, usually, left uncombed by the rushed aides, was neatly styled. I looked like what I was, a retired professional, not an institutional afterthought. "Will you be all right here without me?" I asked Gladys, genuine concern tempering my excitement. She patted my hand. "Don't you worry about old Gladys. Your lawyer friend already explained everything. I'll be joining you at that fancy new place next week." I kissed her papery cheek. Front row seats as promised. Leon arrived precisely at noon, bringing with him Dr. Victoria Chen, a geriatrics specialist with no connection to Catherine's social circle. After a thorough cognitive assessment, she signed the papers declaring me fully competent to manage my own affairs. "Not that there was ever any doubt," Dr. Chen smiled. "But now we have documentation to counter the previous assessment." As Leon escorted me to his waiting car, several residents watched from windows. Nurse Tamika hugged me fiercely. "Give 'em hell," she whispered. The law offices of Morello and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building with views of the river. Catherine and Paul arrived 10 minutes late, clearly annoyed by the summons from an unknown attorney. Their irritation turned to shock when they saw me seated at the conference table, looking nothing like the docile nursing home resident they'd abandoned. "Mom?" Catherine's voice rose an octave. "What's going on? Why aren't you at Lakeside?" Before I could answer, Miles slipped through the door, his lanky teenage frame filling the doorway. My heart leapt at the sight of my grandson, taller than when I'd last seen him, but with the same kind eyes. "Grandma!" He rushed toward me, engulfing me in a hug that smelled of teenage aftershave and hope. "What is he doing here?" Catherine demanded. "He has school." "I invited him," I replied calmly. "He deserves to hear this too." Paul, always quick to calculate angles, assessed my appearance and the formal setting. "Eleanor, if this is about the house sale, everything was completely legal. You signed all the documents voluntarily." Attorney Morello, a silver-haired woman with the precise movements of a fencer, entered and took her position at the head of the table. "Shall we begin? I believe we have much to discuss regarding property ownership, financial management, and perhaps most importantly, medical ethics." Catherine shifted uncomfortably. "I don't understand what this is about." I met my daughter's eyes directly. "It's about consequences, Catherine." Morello opened a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Winters has asked me to address several matters. First, the sale of the property at 1542 Maple Street. While Mrs. Winters did indeed sign the transfer documents, she did so under documented duress following a fraudulent medical assessment." "That's ridiculous," Catherine sputtered. "Dr. Stevens is a respected physician who has agreed to surrender his license rather than face a formal investigation into multiple questionable competency evaluations," Morello finished smoothly. "We have his signed affidavit admitting he never conducted standard cognitive testing protocols." Paul's face darkened. "This is absurd. Eleanor clearly needed assistance." "The second matter," Morello continued as if he hadn't spoken, "concerns the management of Mrs. Winters' pension and financial assets during her unnecessary confinement. She slid financial statements across the table, bank transfers, renovation invoices paid directly from my accounts, jewelry appraisals. Mom gave us permission to handle her finances, Catherine insisted, though her voice had lost its certainty. Curious that these expenses include a 3-week vacation to the Cayman Islands and a new vehicle registered solely in your names, Morello observed, neither of which constitute management of assets for Mrs. Winters' benefit. Miles looked between his parents and me, confusion and dawning comprehension battling across his expressive face. "The final matter," I said, taking over, "concerns your current residence." I removed a document from my purse and slid it across the table. "The property deed to Riverside Towers." Catherine stared at it uncomprehendingly. "What is this?" "Evidence that your current apartment building is owned by Winter Investments LLC, I explained. "A corporation I established 20 years ago." Paul grabbed the document, scanning it frantically. "This can't be legal. We bought our apartment from Lakewood Development Group." "A subsidiary of Winter Investments," Morello confirmed. "Mrs. Winters has owned the building through her investment corporation since before you expressed interest in purchasing a unit there." The silence that fell was absolute. Catherine's carefully constructed reality was collapsing in real time, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and fear. "You've missed your first 2 mortgage payments," I continued quietly. "Technically, I could begin eviction proceedings immediately." "You wouldn't," Catherine whispered. "We're family." "Family," I repeated, tasting the word. "Is family someone who falsifies medical reports to gain control of assets? Who isolates an elderly parent in a substandard facility while liquidating her possessions? Who lies to her son about his grandmother's mental state to prevent him from visiting?" Miles turned to his mother, shock evident. "You told me Grandma didn't recognize me anymore, that it would upset her if I visited." Catherine couldn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to protect you from seeing her decline." "There was no decline," I said firmly. "Only your convenient fiction." Paul, ever pragmatic, leaned forward. "What do you want, Eleanor? To punish us? Take our home? Turn Miles against us? Just tell us what will make this go away." I studied my son-in-law's face, handsome in a conventional way, but with a coldness I'd always attributed to shyness rather than calculation. How blind I'd been. "I don't want punishment," I said finally. "I want justice and protection. Not just for myself, but for others." I outlined my terms clearly. The house sale would be reversed with all proceeds returned. Catherine and Paul would keep their apartment, but under new mortgage terms that included hefty contributions to an elder care monitoring program I was establishing with Morello's help. "Most importantly," I concluded, "I want honesty going forward. No more manipulation, no more lies. And Miles visits me whenever he wishes." My grandson reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it in silent support. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. "How can we ever make this right?" "By remembering that aging doesn't equal incompetence. By recognizing that my worth isn't measured by what you can inherit." I held her gaze steadily. "By being the daughter I raised you to be, not the stranger you've become." The meeting concluded with signatures and subdued promises. As we prepared to leave, Miles pulled me aside. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't know." "It's not your burden," I assured him. "But perhaps there's a lesson here about seeing people clearly, even those closest to you." In the lobby, Catherine attempted one last explanation. "We were worried about you, Mom. It started with good intentions." I studied my daughter's face, the same face I'd watched grow from infancy to womanhood. "Perhaps, but good intentions pave notorious roads." Leon was waiting with the car to take me to my new apartment at the Monarch, a senior living community that respected its residents' independence and dignity. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Catherine standing on the sidewalk, looking lost. "Are you all right?" Leon asked gently. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." 2 months later, my apartment at the Monarch blooms with transplanted dahlias rescued from my old garden. Gladys thrives in the apartment across the hall, her periods of confusion diminished in an environment that stimulates rather than sedates. We host a weekly poker game that has become the social event of the floor. Miles visits every Wednesday after school. Sometimes Catherine comes with him. Our relationship is fragile, rebuilding slowly on foundations of truth rather than convenience. Some days I see glimmers of the daughter I thought I knew. Other days, the stranger who calculated my worth in square footage and pension dollars. I've established the Winters Advocacy Fund with the proceeds from my investments, providing legal support to seniors facing exploitation. Nurse Tamika now works for the foundation, conducting site visits to facilities throughout the state. Yesterday, I received a letter from Catherine. Not an email or text, but a handwritten letter on proper stationery. In it, she attempted to explain her actions, the financial pressures, the societal expectations, but ultimately took responsibility without excuses. The final paragraph read, "I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. Some betrayals cut too deep. But I want you to know I'm trying to become someone worthy of being your daughter again. The lessons you've taught me, both throughout my childhood and in these recent months, are finally taking root. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that people can change, even when they've given you every reason to believe otherwise." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Time would reveal whether her words represented genuine growth or another performance. Either way, I had reclaimed my power and purpose. In my 73rd year, I've learned that the final chapters may be the most surprising, and that sometimes the most powerful position is the one others assume is powerless. My story isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. Not just of assets, but of dignity. Not just of independence, but of truth. Tomorrow, I begin teaching a mathematics class at the community center. Life, after all, is too precious to waste on bitterness when there are still equations to solve and gardens to tend. And if there's one equation I've finally balanced, it's this. Your value never diminishes with age, unless you surrender the calculation to someone else. The first week at Lakeside Gardens nearly broke me. The facility's name was its first deception. There was no lake, just a murky retention pond where geese left their droppings along a muddy perimeter, and the gardens consisted of a few neglected shrubs that hadn't been pruned in years. The building itself had once been a small community hospital in the 1970s, hastily converted to an elder care facility when the new medical center opened across town. The hospital's clinical austerity remained, wide corridors designed for gurneys, walls painted that particular shade of institutional green that somehow managed to be both dingy and glaring, and fluorescent lighting that hummed constantly, flickering just enough to induce a perpetual low-grade headache. My room, shared with Gladys Perkins, age 84, measured roughly 15 by 12 feet. 2 narrow beds with plastic-covered mattresses that crinkled with each movement. 2 metal nightstands bolted to the floor. 2 small dressers with 3 drawers each, barely enough for the meager possessions we were allowed to keep. A single window with a view of the parking lot, the glass reinforced with wire mesh as if they feared we might attempt escape through the 3rd-floor opening. Gladys had been at Lakeside for 3 years. Her children had stopped visiting after the first 6 months. They got what they wanted, she told me during one of her lucid periods, her voice matter-of-fact rather than bitter. My house in Newton Heights sold for nearly $700,000, split 4 ways between my ungrateful progeny, minus the administrative fees they claimed for handling my affairs. She had been a librarian for 42 years, specializing in rare manuscripts. Now her world had shrunk to this shared room, and the day room down the hall where residents were parked in front of daytime television. The indignity of it struck me hardest on my 3rd night, when I realized the soft sobbing I heard wasn't coming from Gladys, but from myself. Morning began at 5:30 a.m. with the harsh overhead lights switched on without warning. Nurse's aide Brenda, perpetually exhausted and understaffed, would shuffle in with our morning medications. "Rise and shine, ladies," she'd announce without enthusiasm. "Pills first, then toileting, then breakfast." The regimentation was infantilizing by design. We were not people with preferences or dignity. We were tasks to be completed, bodies to be maintained at minimum standards. Breakfast arrived on beige plastic trays at precisely 7:15 a.m. Watery scrambled eggs, toast so pale it was practically still bread, and coffee that tasted of chemicals and despair. The food was designed to meet basic nutritional requirements, while being easy to chew and requiring minimal preparation. Taste was irrelevant. We were expected to be grateful for simply being fed. After breakfast came morning activities, which typically meant being wheeled into the day room where a young activities director named Kristen would lead us through exercises that wouldn't challenge a toddler. "Let's all raise our arms to the ceiling," she'd instruct with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Great job, everyone." Some residents participated, others stared vacantly at the wall. A few, like Gladys, simply closed their eyes and retreated into whatever memories remained to them. I refused to surrender so easily. On my fourth day, I approached Kristen after the session. "Do you have any books here? Perhaps a library cart?" Her face brightened at finding someone who could form complete sentences. "We have a shelf in the corner, mostly romance novels and Reader's Digest condensed books that families donated." The shelf turned out to be a wobbly bookcase containing precisely 37 books, all with cracked spines and yellowed pages. I examined each one carefully, finally selecting a dog-eared copy of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. I'd read it at least 3 times before, but the familiar characters might provide some comfort. "You like mysteries?" Kristen asked, seeming genuinely interested. "I like puzzles of all kinds," I replied. "In fact, I used to teach advanced mathematics. Do you have any puzzle books? Crosswords, perhaps? Or Sudoku?" The next day, Kristen brought me a book of logic puzzles she'd purchased with her own money. It wasn't much, but that small act of recognition, of seeing me as a thinking person rather than just another body to be managed, became my first ally in this sterile wasteland. My second ally arrived unexpectedly in the form of Nurse Tamika Johnson. Unlike many of the staff who moved through their tasks with mechanical efficiency, Tamika took moments to actually see the residents. She noticed when Mrs. Abernathy's arthritis was flaring up before the woman even complained. She remembered that Mr. Gonzalez preferred his water with no ice. And she observed that I was different from most newcomers, watching everything with clear eyes rather than the medicated haze that enveloped many residents. On my 6th day, Tamika came to check my blood pressure during her evening rounds. As she wrapped the cuff around my arm, she leaned closer than necessary and whispered, "You don't belong here." I kept my expression neutral. "Few people would choose to be here." "That's not what I mean." She recorded my blood pressure in the chart. "You're sharp as a tack. No cognitive issues whatsoever. So why did your family dump you here?" The bluntness of her question caught me off guard. Most staff carefully avoided acknowledging the uncomfortable truth that many residents were essentially abandoned by families who found them inconvenient. "My daughter believes I'm experiencing cognitive decline," I replied carefully. Tamika's expression spoke volumes. "And this decline conveniently appeared around the time your assets became attractive?" When I didn't immediately answer, she sighed. "I've seen it too many times. My own grandmother went through something similar. That's why I work here, to look out for people like her, like you." That night, I made my first entry in the small notebook I'd managed to keep with me. On the first page, I wrote, "Allies. Kristen, activities. Tamika, night nurse. Assets. Mind still sharp. Knowledge of Catherine's plans. Robert's financial lessons. Limitations. Physical environment. Restricted communication. Limited resources." On the next page, I began mapping out my strategy for reclaiming my life and dignity. Catherine visited on Sunday, exactly as she'd promised. She arrived at 11:05 a.m., carrying a small potted plant and wearing an expression of dutiful concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom!" she exclaimed, embracing me briefly. "How are you settling in?" Isn't this place nice? I gestured around. The day room with its faded wallpaper and collection of mismatched furniture salvaged from what appeared to be thrift stores and garage sales. It's certainly institutional. Catherine's smile tightened. Well, it's the best we could manage on short notice, and the staff seems very attentive. They're understaffed and overworked, I replied mildly, but they do their best. She placed the potted plant, a small struggling African violet, on the table between us. I brought this to brighten up your room. I didn't mention that plants weren't allowed in resident rooms due to hygiene protocols. Catherine wouldn't know this because she hadn't bothered to read the facility guidelines. The violet would be removed as soon as she left. How's Miles? I asked, missing my grandson fiercely. Busy with finals and baseball practice. You know teenagers. Never home. She waved dismissively. He sends his love. I doubted Miles even knew where I was. The careful way Catherine avoided making eye contact when mentioning him suggested she'd crafted a narrative for him as well. Perhaps that I was on an extended vacation or visiting old friends. And the house? I asked, watching her closely. Any progress on those repairs you mentioned? Oh, yes. Her eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time. We've already replaced the outdated kitchen countertops with granite, and the contractor starts on the master bathroom renovation next week. The realtor thinks we could list by the end of the month. I nodded thoughtfully. Sounds expensive. I hope my pension is covering all this. Catherine's smile faltered briefly. Don't worry about any of that, Mom. We're handling everything. You just focus on getting settled here. Our conversation drifted to meaningless small talk, neighborhood gossip, Catherine's tennis league standings, her husband Paul's work promotion. Not once did she ask about my daily routine or whether I needed anything. After precisely 50 minutes, she glanced at her watch and stood. I should get going. Paul and I have dinner plans with the Michelsons. She leaned down to kiss my cheek. I'll visit again next Sunday. As she walked away, I noticed her handbag, a new Louis Vuitton that I knew cost well over $2,000. My pension was evidently covering more than just house renovations. After Catherine left, I retreated to my room where Gladys was arranging her collection of plastic fruit on the windowsill. Her daughter had brought them years ago, cheap decorations from a dollar store, but Gladys treasured them as if they were Fabergé eggs. Your daughter seems nice, Gladys commented without looking at me. Very well dressed. Yes, she's always been fashion conscious. New handbag, Gladys observed. Expensive. My Margaret was the same way with my money. Always had the newest everything while I sat here with no decent shampoo. I studied Gladys with newfound respect. Despite her periodic confusion, she missed very little. How did you cope? I asked quietly. With the betrayal? Gladys finally turned to face me, her roomy eyes surprisingly sharp. Who says I've coped? I'm just waiting. For what? Her smile revealed stained dentures. Justice moves slowly, especially for the elderly, but it does move. That night, I added Gladys to my list of allies. Over the next 2 weeks, I established what I called my parallel infrastructure, systems and connections that existed alongside but separate from the official facility structure. Tamika agreed to let me use her cell phone during her breaks, which allowed me to make calls without them being monitored or recorded on the facility phones. Kristen brought me newspapers and magazines, keeping me connected to the outside world. Luis, the janitor who cleaned our wing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, agreed to mail letters for me without logging them in the facility's outgoing mail register. Using these resources, I made my first contact with Leon Friedman, my financial advisor of 20 years. Leon had managed my investments since Robert died, helping me grow a modest inheritance and my teacher's pension into a surprisingly substantial portfolio. Catherine knew about some of my investments, the conservative mutual funds, the certificates of deposit. But she had no idea about the commercial real estate holdings or the technology startup fund that had performed remarkably well. "Eleanor, thank God," Leon exclaimed when I finally reached him. "I've been trying to contact you for weeks. Your daughter told me you were in Florida visiting old friends." "I'm not in Florida, Leon," I replied calmly. "I'm at Lakeside Gardens Elder Care Facility. Catherine had me declared cognitively impaired and placed me here while she prepares to sell my house." The silence that followed was heavy with shock and outrage. When Leon finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "What do you need me to do?" "First, secure all my accounts. Catherine shouldn't have access to anything beyond the checking account for household expenses." "Already done," he assured me. "When I couldn't reach you directly, I froze everything except that household account. Standard protocol when communication." Patterns change. Relief washed over me. "Good. Now, I need information. Has Catherine made any inquiries about my finances? Tried to access any accounts?" "Multiple attempts," Leon confirmed. "She came to the office with a power of attorney document that didn't pass our verification process. When that failed, she tried to get information over the phone by claiming you were ill and needed funds for medical treatment." I closed my eyes, absorbing this fresh betrayal. "And the Riverside Towers property? Any activity there?" "That's actually why I've been trying to reach you. There's a unit for sale, a luxury 3-bedroom on the 8th floor. And guess who the prospective buyers are?" "Catherine and Paul," I whispered. "Exactly. They've already submitted an application and put down a deposit. The selling price is $1. $2 million. They're financing most of it, but the down payment is substantial, $240,000. I've been wondering where they got that kind of cash. My house, my paid-off house that Catherine was renovating, would likely sell for around $700,000 in the current market." The math wasn't difficult. "Leon, I need you to do something unusual," I said, formulating my plan. "I want you to use my investment corporation to purchase Riverside Towers." There was a pause. "The entire building? Eleanor? That's a $40 million property?" "We have the capital," I reminded him, "between the technology fund liquidation and the commercial holdings in Denver." "Yes, technically we could structure it, but—" "Then do it," I interrupted. "Through a subsidiary, something that can't be easily traced back to me." "And Leon?" "Move quickly. I want this completed before Catherine and Paul close on their unit." After disconnecting with Leon, I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling slightly. The scale of what I was undertaking, the financial maneuvers, the legal complexity, the emotional toll, suddenly felt overwhelming. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Was there an innocent explanation for Catherine's actions? Then I remembered the casual way she'd discussed selling my home, the dismissive tone when I asked about my belongings, the calculated visits that ended before the unappetizing dinner service began, the new luxury handbag while I used institutional shampoo that left my hair like straw, the lies to Leon about my whereabouts, the fabricated cognitive assessment. No, I wasn't overreacting. I was finally responding appropriately to a meticulously orchestrated betrayal. The next phase of my plan required legal assistance. Through Luis, I sent a letter to Barbara Morello, an attorney I'd met through the League of Women Voters years earlier. Barbara specialized in elder law and had a reputation for fierce advocacy. Her response came within days. A greeting card, with pressed flowers on the front that would pass casual inspection by facility staff. Inside, she'd written, "Dear friend, so sorry to hear about your change in residence. I'd love to visit next Tuesday at 2 p.m. to catch up properly. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. Dates, times, witnesses. B.M." When Barbara arrived, she came disguised as an old friend rather than an attorney, bringing cookies and photo albums to maintain the pretense. The facility allowed us to use a small private consultation room normally reserved for medical discussions. Once the door closed, Barbara's demeanor shifted from cheerful visitor to razor-sharp legal mind. "Tell me everything," she instructed, pulling out a notepad. "And don't edit or minimize. I need the complete picture." For the next hour, I detailed Catherine's escalating behavior, the staged forgetfulness incidents, the manipulated medical assessment, the nursing home placement, the house renovations, and the apparent plan to purchase a luxury apartment using proceeds from my home sale. Barbara listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she sat back, her expression grim. "This is unfortunately common," she said. "But you're in a better position than most victims of elder exploitation. You've maintained your cognitive faculties. You've secured your major assets through Leon's intervention, and you've begun documenting the timeline of events." "What are my options?" I asked. "Multiple paths," she replied, counting off on her fingers. 1. We file for emergency guardianship review, challenging the EE medical assessment and seeking immediate release from this facility. 2. We pursue criminal charges for financial exploitation and fraud. 3. We take a more strategic approach, gathering additional evidence while positioning you for maximum leverage. "The third option," I said without hesitation. "I don't just want out of here. I want justice and accountability." Barbara nodded approvingly. "I thought you might say that. Here's what we'll need." She outlined a meticulous evidence-gathering process, documenting facility conditions, recording all interactions with Catherine, obtaining copies of all financial transactions related to my accounts and property, and securing independent medical evaluations to counter the fraudulent cognitive assessment. "How long?" I asked, dreading the answer. 3 months minimum to build an ironclad case, Barbara replied. "Possibly longer if we want to include the real estate transaction at Riverside Towers. 3 more months in this place. 90 more. Days of institutional food, shared rooms, and structured dependency." The prospect was daunting, but the alternative, rushing legal proceedings without sufficient evidence, was worse. 3 months, I agreed. "But I want regular updates on the Riverside acquisition. That's my leverage point." Barbara smiled, a predator's smile that showed all her teeth. "You know, Eleanor, most of my elderly clients who've been victimized by family members just want to escape the situation. Very few have the strategic patience to construct a proper reckoning." "I taught high school mathematics for 38 years, I reminded her. Strategic patience was a job requirement. As Barbara packed up her photo albums, actually legal documents disguised in family photo covers, she paused. "One more thing. We should discuss your end goal here. What do you actually want to achieve?" I considered her question carefully. "I want my freedom and dignity restored. I want financial restitution for any misappropriated funds. I want accountability, not just for my sake, but to deter Catherine from attempting something similar with anyone else." I paused. "And I want my grandson to know the truth." Barbara nodded solemnly. "All achievable objectives. The truth about your grandson might be the most painful, but also the most important. Children deserve to know who their parents really are, especially when they're approaching adulthood themselves." After Barbara left, I began the hardest part of my plan, enduring daily life at Lakeside Gardens while maintaining the appearance of a compliant, slightly confused elderly woman. I participated in childish activities. I ate institutional food without complaint. I took medications that I didn't need, but that kept me categorized as manageable in staff reports. All the while, I documented everything. The cold showers when the water heater malfunctioned, the missed medications when staffing was short, the reused disposable items that should have been discarded after a single use, the residents left sitting in soiled clothing because no one responded to their call buttons. my small notebook filled with observations, dates, times. Tamika and Luis became my primary sources of information about facility operations and staff conversations. Kristen unwittingly provided details about budget cuts and administrative decisions that prioritized profit over resident welfare. Catherine's visits became less frequent. 2 Sundays passed without her appearance. When she finally came in mid-June, she brought a stack of documents requiring my signature. "Just some routine insurance updates," she explained vaguely. "And a few things for the house." I made a show of squinting at the papers, my hands trembling slightly as I held them. "These are hard to read with my old eyes. Could you summarize what I'm signing?" Catherine sighed impatiently. "Mom, it's just standard paperwork. Trust me, it's all in your best interest." "Of course, dear," I murmured, signing each document with a slightly shaky version of my signature. "I've always trusted you to handle these things." What Catherine didn't know was that I'd already instructed Barbara to file formal notifications with all financial institutions and government agencies that any documents signed after my nursing home admission should be considered potentially coerced and subject to verification. My apparent compliance was simply gathering more evidence of her intentions. After she collected the signed papers, Catherine checked her watch. Another new acquisition, I noticed, a Rolex that glinted ostentatiously on her wrist. "I should go," she said, standing abruptly. "We have the contractor coming to discuss the backyard landscaping." "Will I see you next Sunday?" I asked, injecting a hint of neediness into my voice. Catherine hesitated, guilt briefly flickering across her face. "Actually, Paul and I are considering a short vacation. We've both been working so hard on getting the house ready, but I'll try to stop by before we leave." She didn't, of course. The short vacation turned into a 3-week absence with no calls, no visits, not even a postcard. Through Leon, I discovered they had flown to the Maldives, a luxury destination with overwater bungalows costing thousands per night. Meanwhile, I continued using the institutional shampoo that left my scalp itchy and my hair dull. July brought oppressive heat that the facility's aging air conditioning system couldn't adequately address. Residents wilted in the day room, paper fans clutched in arthritic hands providing minimal relief. The heat made everything worse. Tempers shorter, bodily odors stronger, discomfort more acute. During this miserable period, I received an unexpected visitor. Miles, my 16-year-old grandson whom I hadn't seen since my admission to Lakeside, appeared one Tuesday afternoon, looking uncertain and out of place among the elderly residents. "Grandma?" he called, scanning the day room until his eyes found me in the corner, working on a Sudoku puzzle Kristen had brought. "Miles!" I exclaimed, genuine joy surging through me. I opened my arms, and he rushed into them, his gangly teenage frame folding awkwardly to embrace me. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said, pulling back to study my face. "Mom said you were staying with friends in Arizona while the house was being renovated. But then I overheard her telling Dad that they needed to check on Mom at the facility, and I got suspicious. Clever boy. He'd always been observant, even as a child. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I went through Mom's desk when they were at some charity gala," he admitted without remorse. "Found the admission paperwork. Grandma, why are you in this place? You're not sick, are you?" The naked concern in his eyes nearly undid me. "No, Miles, I'm not sick. There's been a misunderstanding about my capacity to care for myself." He looked around the dingy day room, taking in the vacant expressions of many residents, the worn furniture, the general air of neglect. "This place is awful. You can't stay here." "I won't be here much longer," I assured him, patting his hand. "There are some legal matters being addressed." Miles's eyes narrowed. He'd inherited his grandfather's analytical mind and my tenacity. "Mom and Dad are lying about something, aren't they? This is about money." Rather than confirm his suspicions directly, I asked, "Have there been changes at home? New purchases? Travel?" He nodded slowly. "Mom's buying designer everything lately. Dad got a new car. They're talking about the new apartment at Riverside all the time, how exclusive it is, how it's a great investment." But something felt off. "They get weird whenever I ask about you or the house." I chose my words carefully. "Miles, there's a situation that's being resolved. I can't explain everything now, but I promise you'll understand soon. In the meantime, I need you to do something important for me." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "Visit me, but don't tell your parents you're coming here. It's not that I want you to lie, but—" I hesitated, reluctant to place him in the middle of this painful conflict. "But they wouldn't want me to know you're here," he finished grimly. "Don't worry, Grandma. I've gotten pretty good at managing my own schedule. They barely notice where I am most days anyway." The bitterness in his voice revealed another casualty of Catherine and Paul's materialistic focus, their relationship with their son. Miles stayed for nearly 2 hours, filling me in on his life, his summer job at the community pool, his plans for college applications next year. When he finally had to leave to make it home before his parents, he promised to return the following week. True to his word, Miles began visiting regularly, always careful to time his appearances when Catherine would be occupied elsewhere. These visits became bright spots in the otherwise grim routine of Lakeside Gardens, and they provided an unexpected benefit to my plans. Miles, it turned out, was remarkably resourceful. "I brought something for you," he announced during his third visit, slipping a slim object from his backpack. A burner phone, totally untraceable, paid for with cash. I turned the basic flip phone over in my hands. "Where did you get this?" "Best Buy," he shrugged. "It's not even illegal, Grandma. Just practical. Now you can call me, or anyone, without—" Going through the facility phones, the phone became another crucial tool in my parallel infrastructure. With it, I could communicate directly with Leon and Barbara, receiving updates and providing instructions without relying on Tamika's limited break times. By late July, Leon confirmed that the acquisition of Riverside Towers was proceeding smoothly, conducted through a series of shell companies that obscured my involvement. The final closing was scheduled for mid-August, likely before Catherine and Paul would complete their purchase of the luxury unit. Barbara's work was similarly progressing. She had assembled medical experts who reviewed the fraudulent cognitive assessment and prepared statements condemning both the methodology and conclusions. She had documented financial transactions showing a clear pattern of asset misappropriation. She had even obtained statements from facility staff, including Tamika, regarding the inadequate care standards and Catherine's infrequent visits. "We're building an airtight case," Barbara assured me during one of our coded phone conversations. "By September, we'll be ready to move." September. 6 more weeks in this place. The thought was daunting, but I had endured worse challenges. And with Miles's regular visits, Tamika's ongoing support, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my plan was unfolding exactly as intended, I found enough strength to continue the performance. Catherine finally reappeared in early August, tanned from her Maldives vacation and wearing yet another new outfit. She brought a small potted plant, identical to the one from her first visit, apparently not realizing or caring that the original had been removed from my room. "Mom, you're looking—" As she paused, struggling to find a plausible compliment. "Comfortable." I smiled benignly. "The staff takes good care of me." "That's wonderful to hear." She glanced around the day room with barely concealed distaste. "I have exciting news. The house renovations are complete, and we've already had several interested buyers tour the property. The realtor thinks we'll have multiple offers by next week." "How wonderful," I murmured. "And will some of the proceeds be used to move me to a nicer facility?" Catherine's smile faltered slightly. "Well, there are a lot of expenses to cover first. The renovations cost more than expected, and there's the matter of your ongoing care here. But yes, eventually we might consider other options. The calculated vagueness told me everything. There were no plans to improve my situation. The house proceeds were already mentally allocated elsewhere, likely to furnishing their luxury apartment at Riverside Towers. I understand, I said quietly. Money is always complicated. Exactly, Catherine agreed, relieved that I wasn't pressing the issue. Speaking of which, I brought a few more documents that need your signature. Just some updates to your investment. Accounts. She produced a folder containing several official-looking papers. As I had during her previous visit, I made a show of struggling to read them, my hands shaking slightly. This print is so small, I complained mildly. What am I signing, exactly? Just standard updates, Catherine replied, the same evasive explanation as before. The financial advisors recommended these changes for tax purposes. I signed where indicated, maintaining my facade of compliant confusion. Later, I would photograph each document with the burner phone Miles had provided and send the images to Barbara, adding to our growing evidence file. As Catherine prepared to leave, she hesitated, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing her face. Mom, are you really doing okay here? You seem different. For a moment, I was tempted to break character, to confront her with the truth, to demand explanations for her betrayal. But strategic patience prevailed. I'm just tired, dear, I replied softly. At my age, adaptation takes longer. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. I'll try to visit again soon. We're just so busy with the house sale and the new apartment. You understand? Of course, I murmured. Family comes first. As I watched her walk away, designer handbag swinging from her arm, I felt an unexpected pang of grief. Not for my current situation, which would soon be rectified, but for the daughter I thought I had raised. The child who had once made me Mother's Day cards with crooked hearts and too much glitter, who had cried in my arms over playground rejections and first heartbreaks. Somewhere along the way, that daughter had disappeared, replaced by this calculating stranger who valued possessions over people. That night, in the quiet darkness of my shared room, I allowed myself a moment of mourning for the relationship that could never be fully restored, even after my inevitable liberation. Some betrayals cut too deep for complete healing. But as Gladys's soft snoring filled the silence, I reminded myself that my plan wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and restoration. Not just of my freedom and assets, but of truth itself. And sometimes, truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Mid-August brought a heat wave that pushed Lakeside Gardens' ancient air conditioning system beyond its limits. The hallways turned into sweltering tunnels, the day room a greenhouse where elderly residents wilted in plastic chairs. Staff distributed paper cups of lukewarm water and battery-operated handheld fans that did little more than stir the stagnant air. 3 residents were hospitalized for heat-related issues within a single week. I sat by the window in my room, strategically positioning myself to catch whatever breeze might find its way through the partially opened pane. Gladys lay on her bed, a damp washcloth draped across her forehead, muttering about winters in Maine, where she'd grown up. Never should have left Portland, she said to no one in particular. Cold keeps your mind sharp. Heat makes everything fuzzy. Despite the oppressive conditions, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. Leon had called that morning using our secure channel, the burner phone Miles had provided, with news that the Riverside Towers acquisition was complete. Winter Investments LLC now officially owned the building where Catherine and Paul were preparing to purchase their luxury apartment. The management transition will be announced next week, Leon had explained. Tenants will receive formal notification letters, including information about the new ownership structure. And my name won't appear anywhere, I confirmed. Completely. Obscured behind 3 layers of corporate entities, Leon assured me. Even if someone went digging, they'd need a court order to connect you to the property. This milestone energized me despite the heat. I continued my performance as the gradually declining elderly mother, but internally I was counting down days. Barbara had set our timetable. By September 15th, we would make our move, a multi-pronged legal and financial revelation that would liberate me from Lakeside Gardens and hold Catherine accountable for her exploitation. Tamika entered, bringing my evening medications. As usual, when we were alone, she spoke candidly. "Mrs. Winters, 2 more staff quit today. We're down to skeleton crew for the weekend." She lowered her voice further. "If you've got any kind of escape plan brewing, now might be a good time. Documentation is a mess, supervision is minimal, and administration is in panic mode." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "Soon, Tamika. Everything's in place. Just a few more weeks." She nodded, understanding the need for patience. "Fine, but take these." She slipped me a small paper bag containing individually wrapped protein, bars, and a bottle of electrolyte drink. "The kitchen staff is stretched so thin that dinner might be sandwiches again. 3rd time this week." After Tamika left, I tucked the supplies into my nightstand's hidden compartment, a loose panel I'd discovered during my 2nd week that became my secret storage space. It currently held the burner phone, Barbara's business card, a small notebook documenting daily events, and a collection of protein bars that served as my emergency food reserve. Gladys stirred on her bed. "Your nurse friend is a good egg," she observed, her voice clearer than it had been all day. "Not like most of them." "She is," I agreed. "How are you feeling, Gladys?" "Like I'm slowly baking into a human pot pie," she replied with unexpected humor. "But I've survived worse. Did I ever tell you about the blizzard of '78? Trapped in the library for 3 days with nothing but canned soup and Dickens novels." I smiled, grateful for Gladys's occasional lucidity. These moments of genuine connection helped preserve my sanity in an environment designed to erode it. The facility phone rang at the nurse's station, a jarring sound that echoed down the hallway. A minute later, an aide appeared at our door. "Mrs. Winters, call for you." This was unusual. My designated call time was Tuesday afternoons, and Catherine had never called outside her sporadic visits. I followed the aide to the nurse's station, where she handed me the receiver and busied herself with paperwork, remaining within earshot as per facility protocol. "Eleanor Winters speaking," I said formally. "Grandma, it's me." Miles's voice was tight with urgency. "Something's happening with Mom and Dad. They're freaking out about Riverside." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean, dear?" "They got some letter today. Dad's been on the phone for hours, yelling at people. Mom's crying. I heard them talking about new owners and contract reviews and something about financing being jeopardized." So it had begun. The notification that Riverside Towers was under new management. The timing was perfect. Catherine and Paul were likely in the final stages of their purchasing process. "That sounds stressful," I commented neutrally, aware of the aide listening. "I'm sure they'll sort it out." "Grandma, they mentioned you." Miles's voice dropped lower. "Dad said something like, Eleanor's pension won't cover this if the deal falls through. Why would your pension have anything to do with their apartment?" I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they were counting on my pension to help finance their luxury lifestyle. Catherine had likely already factored it into their debt-to-income calculations for the mortgage. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," I replied carefully. "Adults sometimes say confusing things when they're upset." "I don't like it," Miles insisted. "Something feels really wrong. Dad's been looking through financial papers all evening, and Mom keeps saying they're ruined." "Miles, listen to me," I said, injecting calm authority into my tone. "Whatever's happening, it's not your responsibility to fix. Adult problems require adult solutions." "But, no buts. Focus on your summer job and your college applications. I'm handling my situation, and your parents will handle theirs. After reassuring him further and extracting a promise that he'd call again if things escalated, I hung up. The aide was pretending not to have listened to every word. My grandson, I explained with a deliberate touch of grandmotherly pride. Such a worrier. Apparently, his parents are having some issue with a real estate transaction. The aide nodded disinterestedly and escorted me back to my room. As soon as I was alone, I retrieved the burner phone and called Leon. The notification letters have landed, I informed him when he answered. Catherine and Paul are in crisis mode. Perfect timing, Leon replied with satisfaction. Their mortgage pre-approval would be expiring soon anyway. The new management corporation has implemented a temporary freeze on all pending sales transactions for a comprehensive review of contracts. Not completely legal, completely standard procedure during ownership transfers. And completely devastating to their plans, I added, unable to suppress a small smile. How long will this review take? As the majority stakeholder in Winter, investments, that's entirely up to you, Leon reminded me. We could extend it indefinitely or wrap it up next week. Let's coordinate with Barbara, I decided. I want their apartment purchase stalled until our legal proceedings are underway. Maximum leverage. The next day brought another scorching temperature and a surprise visit from Catherine. She appeared at Lakeside Gardens looking distinctly frazzled, her normally perfect blowout slightly frizzy, her designer outfit replaced by simple linen pants and a cotton blouse, her usual makeup minimal. Mom, she greeted me distractedly. Sorry for dropping by unannounced. I was in the area. The facility was at least 20 minutes out of the way from anywhere Catherine would normally go, but I didn't challenge the obvious lie. What a lovely surprise, I said instead. Would you like to sit in the day room? It's marginally cooler there. Catherine glanced around the hallway, noting the overheated conditions with poorly disguised dismay. Actually, can we talk privately? Is your room available? I led her to my shared quarters, where Gladys appeared to be napping. Catherine perched awkwardly on the edge of my narrow bed, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. Mom, I wanted to update you on a few things, she began, her voice artificially bright. The house renovations are complete, and it looks fantastic. We've already had several interested buyers, so that's moving forward nicely. I nodded encouragingly. That's wonderful, dear. The thing is, she continued, her smile straining, there's been a slight complication with our new apartment. Just a temporary setback with the paperwork. Nothing serious. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, watching her carefully. What kind of complication? Catherine waved dismissively. Just some corporate bureaucracy. The building was apparently sold to a new management company, and they're reviewing all pending purchases. It's causing delays with our closing timeline. That sounds frustrating. It is, especially since we'd already arranged the financing. Her fingers twisted more frantically with her purse strap. Which brings me to why I'm here. We might need a little temporary help with cash flow, just until everything gets sorted out. And there it was. The real purpose of her unexpected visit. What kind of help? I asked, maintaining my facade of mild confusion. Well, your pension has been accumulating while you've been here, she explained, her tone shifting to the slow, overly patient cadence people often use with children or those they perceive as cognitively impaired. Medicare covers most of your expenses at Lakeside, so there's quite a bit saved up. We were thinking we could use those funds as a bridge loan, just until the house sells. I blinked at her, deliberately taking longer than necessary to process her request. You want to borrow my pension money? Not borrow exactly, Catherine hedged. More like reallocate. Since we're managing your finances anyway, it makes sense to use those resources where they're needed most urgently. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't even pretending this was for my benefit anymore. I see, I said slowly. And how much are we talking about? Around 60,000, she replied, watching my reaction carefully. Maybe a bit more depending on how long the Riverside situation takes to resolve. $60,000, nearly 2 years of my pension payments. Money that should have been accumulating for my care, for my needs, for my future. Instead, Catherine saw it as a convenient solution to their luxury apartment financing gap. I considered my options carefully. Refusing outright might alert her that I wasn't as compliant or confused as she believed. Yet agreeing too easily might accelerate her financial exploitation before our legal proceedings were ready. That sounds like a lot of money, I said, injecting uncertainty into my voice. Wouldn't I need that if I ever wanted to move to a nicer place? Catherine's expression softened with practiced sympathy. Mom, let's be realistic. Your care needs are only going to increase. Lakeside is adequate for your condition, and Medicare covers the basics. The pension funds would just be sitting unused otherwise. The implication was clear. I wasn't leaving Lakeside. Not for a better facility, not for independent living, not ever. In Catherine's plan, this was my final destination. I suppose you're right, I conceded, allowing my shoulders to slump slightly. You've always been good with money. Your father would be proud. The irony of invoking Robert, who had warned me about exactly this kind of exploitation, was not lost on me. Catherine, however, visibly relaxed at my apparent capitulation. Exactly, she agreed eagerly. Dad always said it was important to make smart financial decisions. I've brought the forms authorizing the transfer. We just need your signature. From her purse, she produced a small stack of documents, far more comprehensive than necessary for a simple pension fund transfer. I put on my reading glasses and deliberately flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. There are so many pages, I observed, my voice quavering slightly. I'm not sure I understand all this legal language. It's just standard paperwork, Catherine assured me, pointing to the signature lines helpfully highlighted in yellow. Nothing to worry about. The financial advisor requires these forms to move funds between accounts. I studied the documents more carefully than she realized, noting that among the pension transfer authorizations were additional forms, granting Catherine expanded power of attorney and access to investment accounts that she shouldn't have known existed. Leon had been right about her multiple attempts to access my finances. Well, if you say it's necessary, I murmured, signing each form with the slightly shaky handwriting I'd perfected during my stay. Each signature was a breadcrumb in the trail of evidence we were assembling. Catherine collected the documents with poorly concealed eagerness. Perfect! I'll get these processed right away. It should help smooth things over until the house sells. I'm glad I could help, I said mildly. That's what family is for, isn't it? Something flickered across Catherine's face. Guilt, perhaps, or a moment of genuine reflection. But it vanished quickly, replaced by her usual efficient mask. Absolutely, she agreed, rising to leave. Family takes care of each other. As she headed toward the door, she paused, glancing at Gladys's seemingly sleeping form. How's your roommate situation? Are you getting along? Gladys is a dear, I replied truthfully. We keep each other company. Catherine nodded, her gaze sweeping dismissively over my roommate's collection of plastic fruit and the few personal items that marked her half of our shared space. That's good. Well, I should go. Lots to handle with this Riverside situation. After she left, Gladys opened one eye. Your daughter's about as subtle as a freight train, she observed dryly. What did she want this time? Just my pension, I replied. $60,000 of it. Gladys snorted. Amateur. My Margaret took twice that much before I caught on. Said she was investing it in a restaurant venture. Turned out the restaurant was a sandals resort in Jamaica, for her and her husband only. I shook my head, still processing Catherine's brazenness. "Did you ever confront Margaret about it?" "No point," Gladys sighed. "By the time I figured it out, the money was gone, and so was any chance of getting justice. The police said it was a family matter since I'd signed the forms. The bank said the same. That's why I ended up here. Nothing left for in-home care or a better facility." Her story reinforced my determination. I wouldn't end up like Gladys, betrayed, depleted, and abandoned in a substandard facility. The difference was that I had caught on before Catherine had completely drained my resources, and I had allies who could help me fight back. That evening, I called Barbara to update her on Catherine's latest maneuver. The attorney was unsurprised, but concerned about the timing. "This accelerates our timeline," she noted. "Once she submits those transfer forms, Leon will delay processing them as long as possible, but eventually she'll realize something's wrong. We need to be ready to move when that happens." "How soon can we proceed?" I asked. "I can have the emergency guardianship hearing scheduled within 10 days, Barbara replied. "The evidence is solid. Dr. Chen's independent assessment clearly contradicts the initial diagnosis of cognitive impairment, and we have documentation of financial exploitation. The judge I'm targeting for the case has a strong record on elder protection issues. And the Riverside situation. Perfect leverage. Once Catherine and Paul discover who actually owns the building, they'll realize they're negotiating with the very person they've been exploiting. It creates an elegant symmetry to the case." We agreed to accelerate our timetable, aiming to file legal proceedings within the week. Barbara would arrange for Dr. Chen to conduct a formal capacity evaluation at Lakeside Gardens, documenting my full cognitive competence. Meanwhile, Leon would continue obstructing Catherine's attempts to access my pension and investment accounts. The next few days passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Outwardly, I maintained my role as just another declining resident of Lakeside Gardens. I attended craft sessions where we made paper flowers from tissue paper. I ate the increasingly sparse meals without complaint. I exchanged pleasantries with staff who barely had time to remember residents' names. Inwardly, I was preparing for liberation. I sorted through the few possessions I had at the facility, determining what to take and what to leave behind. I created a list of people to contact once I was free: old friends from the teaching days, colleagues from volunteer work, neighbors who had probably wondered about my sudden disappearance. I also prepared myself emotionally for the confrontation to come. Catherine's betrayal had cut deeply, but I couldn't allow anger to cloud my judgment or distract from my primary goals: regaining my freedom, securing my assets, and establishing boundaries that would prevent future exploitation. Miles visited twice that week, bringing updates on the continuing chaos at home. Catherine and Paul were apparently fighting constantly, their financial stress exacerbated by the stalled Riverside purchase and the slower-than-expected interest in my house. "Dad keeps saying they're overextended," Miles reported. "Mom blames him for pushing for the Riverside apartment before the house sold. Neither of them is sleeping much." "And how are you handling all this?" I asked, concerned about the impact on my grandson. He shrugged with teenage nonchalance that didn't quite mask his discomfort. "I'm staying out of their way, spending more time at Jason's house. His parents don't scream at each other over mortgage rates." I squeezed his hand. "This will all be resolved soon, I promise. When it is, I hope you'll remember that adult problems belong to adults. None of this is your responsibility to fix or your fault." Miles nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "Will you be coming home? Soon? Back to your house, I mean?" "That's the plan," I assured him. "There are just a few more pieces to put in place." On August 25th, exactly 7 weeks after my admission to Lakeside Gardens, Dr. Victoria Chen arrived for my formal capacity evaluation. Facility administration had been notified of the assessment by Barbara, who cited regulations allowing residents the right to independent medical consultations. They weren't happy about it, but legally couldn't prevent the evaluation. Dr. Chen was a stark contrast to Dr. Stevens, who had conducted the initial fraudulent assessment. Where he had been cursory and dismissive, she was thorough and attentive. She administered standardized cognitive tests, evaluated my functional capacity, and conducted a detailed interview about my daily activities, financial awareness, and decision-making abilities. Mrs. Winters, she concluded after nearly 2 hours. Your cognitive function is not only intact, but exceptional for someone of any age. Your memory, executive functioning, and judgment show no significant impairments whatsoever. Unlike my previous evaluation, I assume, I commented dryly. Dr. Chen's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing genuine indignation. The previous assessment wouldn't pass muster in any reputable geriatric practice. The documentation is incomplete, the testing inadequate, and the conclusions unsupported by any objective measures. Frankly, it borders on malpractice. Her formal report would become a cornerstone of our legal case, directly contradicting the fraudulent evaluation that had been used to justify my placement at Lakeside Gardens. With this critical piece in place, Barbara scheduled our emergency guardianship hearing for September 4th, just 10 days away. The weekend before the hearing brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Catherine appeared at Lakeside Gardens with Paul in tow, his first visit since my admission. They arrived looking grim and determined, requesting a private meeting with me and the facility administrator. We gathered in the small conference room used for care planning meetings. The administrator, Mrs. Phelps, seemed confused by the formal request but accommodated it, perhaps assuming it related to financial arrangements for my continued stay. "Mom," Catherine began once we were settled, "we need to discuss some changes to your care plan." I noticed she was dressed more formally than during her previous visit, a structured blazer over a silk blouse, pearl earrings, hair perfectly styled. This was Catherine in professional mode, preparing to handle a situation. "What kind of changes?" I asked, injecting just the right note of elderly anxiety into my voice. Catherine and Paul exchanged glances before she continued. "We've been exploring other options for your long-term care. While Lakeside has been adequate for your initial transition, we feel a more specialized memory care unit would better suit your needs moving forward." Memory care, the locked units where facilities housed residents with advanced dementia, units where visitors were restricted, where residents had even fewer rights, where chemical restraints were more commonly employed to manage difficult behaviors. Mrs. Phelps looked surprised. Mrs. Winters hasn't displayed any wandering behaviors or significant memory issues that would necessitate memory care. Her adjustment here has been remarkably smooth. "With all due respect," Paul interjected, speaking for the first time, "we've noticed concerning changes during our visits. Confusion about financial matters, paranoid statements about money being taken, difficulty recognizing family members." I stared at him, momentarily speechless at the brazen fabrication. I had never exhibited any such symptoms, either genuinely or as part of my careful performance of mild cognitive decline. "I don't recall documenting any such symptoms," Mrs. Phelps said, flipping through my chart with a frown. "They may not be apparent to staff," Catherine explained smoothly. "Mom is quite good at hiding her confusion in brief interactions. It's during our longer family visits that these issues become evident." I realized with sudden clarity what was happening. They had discovered, or at least suspected, that something was amiss with their financial plans. Perhaps Leon's delays in processing the pension transfer had raised red flags. Perhaps they'd received notification about the independent medical evaluation. Whatever the trigger, they were moving to further restrict my autonomy before I could challenge their control. "I don't understand," I said, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. "I thought I was doing well here. I don't want to move again." Catherine reached across the table to pat my hand with rehearsed sympathy. I know change is frightening, Mom, but this is really for the best. Meadowbrook Gardens has an excellent memory care program, and they have an opening available immediately. Immediately. They wanted to move me before the guardianship hearing scheduled for September 4th. If I were transferred to a locked memory care unit, Barbara might have difficulty even accessing me for the proceedings. This seems rather sudden, Mrs. Phelps observed, her professional caution evident. Typically, a transition to memory care would follow documented cognitive decline and a formal reassessment. We have the original neurological assessment from Dr. Stevens, Paul countered, producing a folder of documents. It specifically mentions the likelihood of progressive decline requiring increased supervision. Additionally, as Mrs. Winter's legal guardians, we have the authority to make these care decisions. Mrs. Phelps accepted the folder reluctantly. I'll need to review these materials and consult with our medical director. Transitions between levels of care require proper documentation and planning. Of course, Catherine agreed smoothly. But we'd like to move quickly. Meadowbrook can only hold the space until Wednesday. Wednesday, 2 days before our scheduled guardianship hearing. The timing couldn't be more suspicious. This is all happening very fast, I protested, making a show of becoming agitated. I don't want to go to a memory place. I like it here. I know the people here. Catherine's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Mom, you're getting upset, which only proves our point. Your emotional regulation has been declining. These outbursts are exactly why you need more specialized care. It was a masterful trap. Any objection I raised could be interpreted as evidence of confusion or agitation, further justifying their claim that I needed memory care. If I appeared too rational and articulate, they would know I'd been performing my confusion all along. If I became genuinely distressed, it would support their narrative of deterioration. I chose a middle path, allowing tears to well in my eyes. I just don't understand why everything has to change again. I've only just gotten used to this place. Mrs. Phelps looked uncomfortable with the entire situation. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after I've had time to review the documentation and consult with our care team. Changes in placement are significant decisions that shouldn't be rushed. We understand, Paul said tersely, but time is of the essence. Meadowbrook's opening won't remain available indefinitely. After they left, with Catherine promising to return the following day to check on the progress of the transfer arrangements, Mrs. Phelps lingered in the conference room. Mrs. Winters, she said carefully, is there anything you'd like to discuss privately about this situation? I considered revealing everything: the exploitation, the pending legal proceedings, the independent medical evaluation contradicting my supposed cognitive decline. But Mrs. Phelps, while seemingly concerned, was still a facility administrator whose primary allegiance would be to avoiding legal complications for Lakeside Gardens. I'm just upset about the idea of moving, I said instead. Change is hard at my age. She nodded sympathetically. I'll review everything carefully before making any recommendations. Try not to worry too much in the meantime. As soon as I returned to my room, I retrieved the burner phone and called Barbara, explaining the situation in urgent whispers. They're trying to move you to memory care before our hearing, she summarized, her voice tight with controlled anger. This changes everything. We need to file for emergency intervention immediately. How soon can you make that happen? I asked. I'll have papers filed with the court by tomorrow morning, she promised. In the meantime, do not, under any circumstances, agree to any transfer or sign any documents Catherine or Paul present to you. And if they try to move me without my consent? Barbara's voice turned grimly determined. Tell every staff member within earshot that you do not consent to transfer. Make it clear you're being moved against your will. Use the phrase I do, not consent repeatedly. If necessary, will involve adult protective services and law enforcement. After ending the call, I sat on my bed, mind racing. The confrontation I had carefully planned, with all evidence in place and leverage secured, was now being forced prematurely. Catherine and Paul were making a desperate move to maintain control, likely suspecting that their financial house of cards was about to collapse. Gladys shuffled into the room, returning from her afternoon bingo session. She took one look at my face and asked, "What happened?" "They're trying to move me to memory care," I explained, "to a locked unit before I can challenge their guardianship." Gladys lowered herself carefully onto her bed. "Then it's time for the nuclear option, my friend." "Nuclear option?" She nodded gravely. "I've been saving this strategy for myself, but you need it more urgently." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The facility can't transfer you if you're actively being evaluated for potential medical issues. It's against regulations, creates too much liability." "What kind of medical issues?" I asked, intrigued despite my distress. Gladys smiled, a crafty, knowing smile that reminded me she had once been a formidable woman with a keen mind before age, and institutional living had dimmed her light. "Chest pain," she said simply. "Unexplained intermittent chest pain that coincidentally appears whenever transfer paperwork is presented. Not severe enough for hospitalization, but concerning enough that no responsible facility would risk a transfer without comprehensive cardiac clearance, which, conveniently, can take weeks to schedule and complete." I stared at her in amazement. "Gladys, that's brilliant," she shrugged. "When you've been in the system as long as I have, you learn its pressure points. Now, we just need to make sure Nurse Tamika is on shift when your daughter returns tomorrow. She'll understand exactly what's happening and document your symptoms appropriately." For the first time since Catherine and Paul's ambush, I felt a glimmer of hope. Between Barbara's emergency legal maneuvers and Gladys's institutional sabotage strategy, we might just buy enough time to prevent the transfer and proceed with our original plan. That night, I slept fitfully, dreams filled with locked doors, and Catherine's face looming over me saying, "It's for your own good, Mom." When morning came, I was exhausted but resolved. Today would determine whether I reclaimed my freedom or lost what little autonomy I still possessed. Tamika arrived for her shift at 7 a.m. I pulled her aside during medication distribution, explaining the situation in hurried whispers. "Memory care at Meadowbrook?" She frowned deeply. "That place is basically a warehouse with nurses. Once you're in, you're not coming out." "Exactly," I confirmed. Gladys suggested the chest pain strategy, to delay transfer. Tamika nodded immediately, understanding the plan without further explanation. "I'll document any symptoms you report. No responsible doctor would sign off on a transfer with undiagnosed cardiac issues." Armed with this backup plan, I waited for Catherine's return. The morning passed slowly, each tick of the clock in the day room stretching into infinity. I picked at my lunch without appetite, rehearsing what I would say when Catherine arrived with transfer paperwork. But Catherine didn't come. Neither did Paul. Instead, at precisely 2 p.m., Barbara Morello arrived with a court officer and Dr. Victoria Chen. "Eleanor," Barbara greeted me with barely suppressed triumph, "the judge granted our emergency petition. We have a temporary restraining order preventing any transfer from this facility pending a full guardianship review. Additionally, your daughter and son-in-law are temporarily barred from making any financial or healthcare decisions on your behalf." Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. "They can't move me?" "They can't move you," Barbara confirmed. "In fact, they can't even visit without supervision until after the hearing." Dr. Chen stepped forward. The judge was particularly disturbed by the contrast between my evaluation and the original assessment. He's ordered a comprehensive review of Dr. Stevens' recent cases involving cognitive capacity. The court officer, a stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform, handed me an official document. "This is your copy of the restraining order, Mrs. Winters. Facility administration has already received their copy and been instructed on compliance requirements." I held the paper carefully, marveling at how this single document represented the first tangible step toward reclaiming my autonomy. After 7 weeks of performing vulnerability, of strategic patience, of careful documentation. The tide had finally turned. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Barbara said with satisfaction, "we prepare for Friday's hearing, and we inform your daughter and son-in-law that their game is over." The morning of the guardianship hearing dawned clear and bright. September had arrived with a merciful break in the heat, bringing crisp air that felt like a promise of change. I stood at the small window in my room, watching the facility's groundskeeper half-heartedly rake leaves from the meager lawn. Today would determine everything: my freedom, my autonomy, my future. Gladys was uncharacteristically quiet as she helped me prepare, her arthritic hands carefully fastening the buttons on the navy blue dress Barbara had brought for me to wear to court. The outfit was simple but dignified, worlds away from the shapeless sweatpants and institutional gowns that had become my daily uniform at Lakeside. "You look like yourself again," Gladys observed, her voice tinged with both approval and wistfulness. "Like a person with a life, not just another old body waiting to die." I squeezed her hand gently. "When this is over, we'll work on getting you out of here too." She shook her head, a sad smile playing across her weathered face. "Too late. For me, Eleanor, my children liquidated everything years ago. There's nowhere for me to go, and no resources to get there." She straightened my collar with surprising precision. "But watching you walk out of here under your own power, that'll be victory enough for both of us." A soft knock interrupted our moment. Tamika entered, technically off duty but present nonetheless, carrying a small makeup bag. "Thought you might want these finishing touches?" she offered. "Nothing dramatic, just enough to make sure everyone in that courtroom sees the capable woman you are, not the confused elder they're expecting." With practiced efficiency, she applied light foundation, a touch of blush, and a natural lipstick. The transformation was subtle but significant, less about vanity than about presentation. In the small mirror Tamika held up, I saw not the institutional resident I'd become over the past 7 weeks, but the retired mathematics teacher, community volunteer, and independent widow I'd been before Catherine's intervention. Barbara arrived precisely at 9:30 a.m., accompanied by a court-appointed observer who would document the process of transitioning me from the facility to the courthouse. The restraining order had effectively neutralized Catherine and Paul's attempt to move me to memory care, but Barbara wasn't taking any chances. Every step of today's proceedings would be meticulously documented to prevent later claims of impropriety. "Ready?" Barbara asked, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. I nodded firmly. "More than ready." The facility administrator, Mrs. Phelps, met us in the lobby with a folder of discharge paperwork. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I detected an undercurrent of discomfort. The emergency restraining order had placed Lakeside Gardens in an awkward position, complicit in a potentially improper guardianship arrangement, but legally obligated to cooperate with its dissolution. "These are your personal belongings inventory and medication lists," she explained, handing me the folder. "The court will need to see that proper discharge protocols were followed." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the documents. "And thank you for your cooperation during this difficult situation." A flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. "Mrs. Winters, I want you to know that had we been aware of the circumstances surrounding your admission, we would have followed exactly the same procedures," I finished for her, not unkindly. "Because the paperwork was in order, and the system is designed to process rather than question." She didn't contradict me, which was confirmation enough. As we walked toward the exit, several staff members and residents gathered to watch. Tamika gave me a subtle thumbs up. Kristen from Activities called out a cheerful, "Good luck." Gladys stood in the doorway of the day room, her thin frame surprisingly straight, a fierce pride in her roomy eyes as she witnessed what she had been denied, an escape with dignity. The September air felt intoxicating after weeks of institutional staleness. I paused briefly on the sidewalk, filling my lungs with its freshness, before allowing Barbara to guide me to her waiting car. The court-appointed observer, a quiet woman named Ms. Ramirez, documented each step with clinical precision. "The hearing is scheduled for 11 a.m., Barbara explained as we drove toward the downtown courthouse. "Judge Malcolm Hernandez is presiding. He's known for his strong positions on elder rights and has a history of skepticism toward guardianship petitions." "And Catherine and Paul?" I asked. "Will they be there?" "They've been formally notified and required to appear. Their attorney contacted me yesterday requesting a continuance, which Judge Hernandez denied. They'll be there." I nodded, mentally preparing myself for the confrontation to come. Despite everything, the prospect of facing Catherine, of publicly exposing her betrayal, brought a profound sadness. No matter the outcome, our relationship would never recover from this breach. The daughter I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone whose priorities and values were fundamentally incompatible with mine. "Eleanor," Barbara said gently, sensing my melancholy, "remember that today isn't about punishment. It's about restoration of your rights, your autonomy, your dignity. Whatever emotions arise, try to stay focused on that purpose." The courthouse was an imposing limestone building with wide steps and classical columns. Barbara led me through security and up to the third floor, where family court proceedings were held. Several people sat on benches in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, their faces etched with the particular strain that accompanies family legal disputes. We were early, as Barbara had planned, giving me time to review my testimony and prepare, mentally, for the proceedings. She guided me to a small conference room reserved for our use. "Let's go over the key points again," she suggested, arranging her documents on the table. "The judge will want to hear directly from you about several matters." For the next 40 minutes, we rehearsed my responses to likely questions about my cognitive capacity, my understanding of financial matters, my awareness of property values and investments, and my ability to make informed healthcare decisions. Barbara emphasized that I should speak clearly and directly, without emotional flourishes that might undermine my presentation as a rational, capable adult. At 10:50 a.m., Ms. Ramirez indicated it was time to enter the courtroom. As we gathered our materials, Barbara's assistant appeared at the door, slightly breathless. "They're here," she reported. Catherine and Paul just arrived with their attorney, Martin Greaves from Greaves and Whitfield. Barbara's eyebrows rose slightly. "Greaves is expensive. Corporate law background, not typically involved in guardianship cases." "They brought someone else too," the assistant added. "A man in his 50s, medical bag. Balding, glasses." "Dr. Stevens," I surmised. "The doctor who provided the original cognitive assessment." Barbara nodded grimly. "They're bringing out all the artillery." "Good, it shows they're worried." We made our way to the courtroom, entering through heavy wooden doors into a space both intimidating and austere. Judge Hernandez had not yet arrived, but the clerk was organizing documents at the bench, and the court reporter was setting up her stenography equipment. Barbara guided me to the plaintiff's table on the right side of the room. As we settled into our seats, the doors opened again, and Catherine entered with Paul close behind. They were followed by a distinguished-looking attorney in an expensive suit, and Dr. Stevens, carrying a leather portfolio and looking distinctly uncomfortable. Catherine's eyes locked with mine across the room. I expected anger, perhaps defiance, but what I saw instead was momentary shock, followed by calculation. The mother she was accustomed to seeing at Lakeside, slightly disheveled, institutionally dressed, meekly cooperative, had been replaced by someone who looked remarkably like the independent woman I'd been before her intervention. Her gaze flicked to my outfit, my styled hair, my alert posture, clearly reassessing her strategy in real time. Paul leaned in to whisper something in her ear, his expression tense. Their attorney, Mr. Greaves, maintained a composed professional demeanor as he arranged his materials at the defense table, but Dr. Stevens fidgeted nervously with his tie, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. At precisely the appointed hour, Judge Hernandez entered, a tall man with silver-gray hair and the deliberate movements of someone who didn't believe in rushing important matters. After the formal opening of proceedings, he surveyed the room, with keen dark eyes, lingering briefly on each face before addressing the court. "We are here in the matter of Eleanor Winters, petition for review of guardianship," he stated, his voice resonant and measured. This emergency hearing was granted based on allegations of improper guardianship designation and potential financial exploitation. Ms. Morello, as petitioner's counsel, you may begin. Barbara rose with practiced grace. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are seeking immediate dissolution of the current guardianship arrangement established on July 10th of this year, which placed all medical and financial decision-making authority for Eleanor Winters in the hands of her daughter, Catherine Winters Donovan, and son-in-law, Paul Donovan." She proceeded to outline our case with methodical precision. The questionable cognitive assessment that had been the basis for the guardianship, the contradictory findings of Dr. Victoria Chen's independent evaluation, the documentation of financial activities suggesting exploitation rather than proper management of my assets. "Most disturbing, Your Honor," Barbara continued, "is the recent attempt to transfer Mrs. Winters to a locked memory care facility ahead of today's hearing, a move that appears designed specifically to prevent her from challenging the guardianship arrangement." Judge Hernandez turned his attention to Catherine and Paul's attorney. "Mr. Greaves, your response to these allegations?" Martin Greaves stood, exuding the confident authority of someone accustomed to corporate boardrooms rather than family court. "Your Honor, we categorically deny any impropriety in the establishment or execution of this guardianship. Mrs. Winters Donovan and Mr. Donovan have acted solely out of concern for Eleanor Winters' well-being, based on documented cognitive decline, confirmed by a licensed physician." He gestured toward Dr. Stevens, who seemed to shrink slightly under the judge's scrutiny. The proposed transfer to memory care was recommended by healthcare professionals based on concerning behavioral changes observed during family visits, not, as opposing counsel suggests, an attempt to obstruct legal proceedings. Judge Hernandez studied both attorneys thoughtfully before addressing me directly. "Mrs. Winters, I'd like to hear from you. In your own words, please tell the court why you believe this guardianship should be dissolved." I rose, feeling a momentary flutter of nerves that quickly subsided. After decades of commanding classrooms full of restless teenagers, one stern judge held little intimidation value. "Your Honor, the guardianship should be dissolved because it was established under false pretenses, has been used primarily to gain control of my assets rather than ensure my welfare, and is unnecessary given my full cognitive capacity and ability to manage my own affairs." My voice was steady, my diction clear. From the corner of my eye, I saw Catherine shift uncomfortably in her seat. "The cognitive assessment that formed the basis for this guardianship was conducted by Dr. Stevens, who spent less than 15 minutes with me and administered no standardized cognitive tests. He asked me a few basic questions about the date and the president, then declared me incapable of independent decision-making." Dr. Stevens stared fixedly at the table, his discomfort increasingly evident. "Since being placed at Lakeside Gardens," I continued, "my daughter has visited infrequently, approximately once every 2 weeks for less than an hour each time. During these visits, she has never consulted me about my preferences regarding my care, my home, or my finances. Instead, she has proceeded with renovating and preparing my house for sale without my meaningful consent, restricted my access to my grandson, and most recently, attempted to access some $60,000 from my pension funds for what she described as a temporary bridge loan related to her purchase of a luxury apartment." Judge Hernandez listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he asked, "Mrs. Winters, are you aware of the current value of your home Your monthly expenses and the status of your investment accounts? Yes, Your Honor. My home at 542 Maple Street has a current market value of approximately $700,000, based on recent comparable sales in the neighborhood. My monthly expenses prior to facility placement averaged $2,800, including utilities, property taxes, insurance, groceries, and medical costs not covered by Medicare. My investment portfolio, managed by Leon Friedman at Capital Horizon Advisors, has a current value of approximately $2 million, primarily in a diversified mix of mutual funds, bonds, and selective real estate investments. Catherine's head snapped up at this last detail, her expression a mixture of surprise and dismay. She clearly hadn't known the full extent of my investments, only the more conservative accounts I had occasionally mentioned over the years. The testimony continued, with Dr. Victoria Chen providing expert opinion on my cognitive capacity, and Leon Friedman detailing Catherine's attempts to access my accounts. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. Miles, my 16-year-old grandson, had asked to speak, and Judge Hernandez had agreed to hear him briefly. Miles took the stand looking both nervous and determined in a slightly too large dress shirt and tie. Catherine appeared genuinely shocked by his presence, clearly unaware that he had planned to testify. Miles, please tell the court about your interactions with your grandmother before and after her placement at Lakeside Gardens, Judge Hernandez instructed gently. Miles straightened his shoulders. Before all this happened, I saw Grandma at least once a week. She helped me with my advanced math homework, attended my baseball games, and we had Sunday dinners together regularly. She was completely normal, remembered everything, managed her house perfectly, and was always the one who remembered everyone's appointments and important dates. He glanced at me, then continued. After she suddenly disappeared, Mom told me Grandma was visiting friends in Arizona. Later, the story changed to her staying with relatives in Florida. I thought it was weird that she hadn't said goodbye to me, but Mom said Grandma had been confused lately, and it was better this way. Catherine stared at her son, her expression a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. When did you discover your grandmother was actually at Lakeside Gardens? The judge prompted. About a month after she went there. I overheard Mom and Dad arguing about facility fees and got suspicious. I searched Mom's office when they were out and found the admission. Paperwork. I've been visiting Grandma secretly for weeks. She's exactly the same as she always was. Smart, organized, totally aware of everything. The only difference is, she was stuck in that awful place while you and Dad were trying to sell her house and buy that fancy apartment. The simplicity and directness of Miles's testimony seemed to affect Judge Hernandez deeply. After a few more questions, he thanked Miles for his courage and dismissed him from the stand. As the hearing entered its third hour, the evidence of improper guardianship and financial exploitation continued to mount. Barbara methodically presented documentation of the pension fund transfer attempt, the hasty renovation and planned sale of my home, and the suspicious timing of the proposed memory care transfer just before our scheduled hearing. Finally, Judge Hernandez called for closing statements and then took a brief recess to consider his ruling. Those 20 minutes were among the longest of my life. Barbara sat beside me, projecting confidence but periodically squeezing my hand, reassuringly. Across the aisle, Catherine, Paul, and their attorney huddled in tense conversation, occasionally glancing in my direction. When Judge Hernandez returned, the courtroom fell completely silent. Having reviewed all testimony and evidence in this matter, he began, I find compelling proof that the guardianship of Eleanor Winters was established under questionable circumstances, based on an inadequate medical assessment, and has subsequently been executed in a manner suggesting financial exploitation rather than protection. He turned to Catherine and Paul, his expression stern. The court is deeply troubled by the evidence of attempted asset misappropriation, the restriction of Mrs. Winters' communication with family members, and particularly the recent attempt to transfer her to a memory care facility immediately prior to this hearing, an action that appears calculated to prevent her from challenging the guardianship. Therefore, he continued, I am ordering the immediate and complete dissolution of the current guardianship arrangement. Mrs. Winters is hereby restored to full legal capacity regarding all financial, medical, and personal decisions, effective immediately. Relief washed through me. A physical sensation of weights being lifted from my shoulders. 7 weeks of strategic patience, of careful documentation, of performing the compliance expected of me while building the case for my liberation, all culminating in this moment of vindication. But Judge Hernandez wasn't finished. Additionally, I am ordering a freeze on all financial accounts previously controlled by Catherine Winters Donovan and Paul Donovan as guardians, pending a full forensic accounting of transactions made during the guardianship period. Any funds already transferred or spent will need to be fully documented and justified. Catherine paled visibly. Paul placed a steadying hand on her arm. The court is also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential charges related to financial exploitation of an elder, as well as to the state medical board regarding Dr. Stevens's evaluation practices. He looked directly at me. Mrs. Winters, you are free to return to your home immediately. The court will issue an order preventing any sale or transfer of your property without your explicit consent. I am also granting a temporary restraining order preventing Catherine Winters Donovan and Paul Donovan from accessing your residence or financial accounts without court approval. With a decisive tap of his gavel, Judge Hernandez concluded the proceedings. This hearing is adjourned. As people began to rise and gather their belongings, I remained seated, momentarily overwhelmed by the finality of the judge's ruling. After weeks of uncertainty and restraint, the sudden restoration of my freedom required a moment to process. Barbara squeezed my hand. We did it, she said simply. You're free. I nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. Thank you. For everything. As we prepared to leave, Catherine approached, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Paul attempted to follow, but she waved him back. Mom, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I never meant— Please don't, I interrupted quietly. Not here, not now. Whatever explanations or justifications you want to offer, today isn't the time. She flinched slightly but pressed on. What happens now? With us, I mean. The question contained multitudes. Was she asking about our relationship, about potential criminal charges, about financial restitution? Perhaps all of these. I don't know, I answered honestly. But whatever happens, it will be on my terms, not yours. For the first time in months, that choice belongs to me. Catherine nodded slowly, something like genuine regret flickering across her face. And Miles? Miles is welcome in my home anytime. That has never changed. She seemed about to say more, but Mr. Greaves approached, placing a cautioning hand on her shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, she turned and walked away, joining Paul at the courtroom door. As they left, Miles appeared, having waited outside during the judge's ruling. He rushed to embrace me, his gangly teenage frame enveloping me in a hug that contained all the worry and relief he'd been carrying. You did it, Grandma, he whispered fiercely. You beat them. I held him close, savoring the simple joy of embracing my grandson without institutional supervision or time constraints. No, Miles, we did it. I couldn't have managed without your help. 3 weeks later, I stood in my living room on Maple Street, surveying the changes Catherine and Paul had made during my absence. The warm oak flooring I had loved had been replaced with trendy gray laminate. My comfortable, if slightly worn, furniture had disappeared, replaced by staged pieces meant to appeal to potential buyers. Family photos had been removed, walls repainted in the bland neutrals that realtors always recommend. It no longer felt entirely like my home, but I was determined to reclaim it. With Miles's help, I had begun restoring personal touches. My collection of mathematics books returned to the shelves, my grandmother's quilt draped over the back of the new sofa, fresh flowers from my garden arranged in the crystal vase Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. Barbara had kept me updated on the legal proceedings. The forensic accounting of my finances during Catherine and Paul's guardianship had revealed approximately $87,000 in questionable expenditures, renovations I hadn't authorized, administrative fees they had paid themselves, and withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for. The district attorney was reviewing the case for potential criminal charges, though I had mixed feelings about seeing my daughter prosecuted. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panels beside the front door, I recognized Leon's distinctive silhouette. He had been instrumental in helping me reestablish control of my accounts and had promised a final update on the Riverside Tower situation. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly as I opened the door. "You're looking well. Freedom clearly agrees with you." "Freedom and proper shampoo," I replied wryly, ushering him inside. The institutional variety was particularly harsh. We settled, in the kitchen, the one room Catherine hadn't completely transformed, and I poured coffee into the familiar mugs that had somehow survived the renovations. "I have interesting news," Leon began, accepting his cup. "Catherine and Paul received formal eviction proceedings yesterday from Riverside Towers management." I raised an eyebrow. "Eviction? I thought they hadn't completed the purchase yet." "They hadn't finalized, but they'd been permitted early occupancy while the financing details were supposedly being resolved. They've been living there for nearly 2 weeks, moving in furniture, establishing utilities, the works. And now they're being evicted," I said, digesting this development. "On what grounds?" Leon smiled slightly. "Misrepresentation on their financial application. Specifically claiming access to assets that weren't legally theirs, namely, your pension and proceeds from your house sale." I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. They must be devastated. That apartment represented everything they wanted: status, luxury, the right address. "They've requested a meeting with the building owner to plead their case," Leon continued. "It's scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in the management office." "And will the owner attend?" Leon's smile widened. "The owner's representative certainly will." The Riverside Towers management office was designed to impress: leather seating, marble floors, tasteful artwork suggesting exclusive living. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a well-tailored pantsuit that Barbara had helped me select for precisely this occasion. Leon met me in the lobby, reviewing final details before escorting me to the conference room where Catherine and Paul waited. When we entered, their expressions transformed from anxious anticipation to stunned disbelief. Catherine half rose from her chair, then sank back down. Paul's mouth actually hung open for a moment before he managed to close it. "Mom?" Catherine finally managed. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning, Catherine, Paul," I greeted them calmly, taking a seat across the conference table. "I believe you requested this meeting to discuss your eviction notice." Paul glanced between Leon and me, confusion evident. You work for Riverside Management now?" "Not exactly," Leon interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Winters is here, as the owner's representative." A moment of silence as they processed this statement. "The owners?" Catherine began, then stopped, realization dawning slowly across her face. "You own Riverside Towers?" "Winter Investments LLC owns Riverside Towers," I corrected her. "I am the majority shareholder of Winter Investments." Paul's face flushed, a deep red. "That's impossible. This building was owned by Lakewood Development Group." "A subsidiary of Winter Investments," Leon explained, his tone professionally detached. "The acquisition was completed while Mrs. Winters was at Lakeside Gardens, Quite a coincidence, really. Catherine stared at me, seemingly unable to reconcile the mother she had institutionalized as cognitively impaired with the woman now revealed to control a multi-million-dollar property investment. "How long?" she finally asked. "How long? Have you been planning this?" "I've been investing in commercial real estate for nearly 20 years, I replied truthfully. "Your father always emphasized diversification. The specific acquisition of this building, however, was a more recent decision, made after I overheard your discussion about my being a burden and your plans to gain control of my assets." Paul looked like he might be ill. "So this eviction is revenge?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Paul. It's consequence. The eviction is based on genuine misrepresentation in your financial application. You claimed access to assets that were never yours to control." "What do you want?" Catherine asked, her voice small. "To humiliate us? To make us homeless?" "What I want," I said carefully, "is recognition of boundaries. You attempted to take my home, my freedom, and my dignity. You nearly succeeded. I'm not interested in revenge, but I am interested in justice and accountability." I placed a folder on the table between us. "This contains a proposed resolution. You will repay the $87,000 in misappropriated funds from my accounts. You will complete 6 months of community service at a local elder care advocacy organization. You will attend family counseling with Miles, who has been deeply affected by your actions." They stared at the folder without touching it. "In return," I continued, "I will not press criminal charges, though I cannot control whether the district attorney chooses to pursue them independently. And I will permit you to remain in your apartment under a revised lease agreement with rent adjusted to a fair market rate without the ownership option you had originally negotiated." Catherine finally reached for the folder with trembling hands. "Why would you do this, after everything we did?" "Because punishment isn't my purpose," I answered simply. "Restoration is, not just of my life, but of whatever might be salvageable in our family. Miles deserves that attempt, even if none of us are certain of its success." I stood, signaling that the meeting was concluding. "You have 48 hours to consider these terms. If you choose not to accept them, the eviction will proceed, and I will support whatever charges the district attorney recommends." As I turned to leave, Catherine spoke again, her voice catching. "Mom, did you ever consider that we might have actually been concerned about you? That it wasn't all just about money?" I paused at the door, looking back at my daughter, this person I had raised, loved, and ultimately failed to truly know. "I believe you told yourself a story where your actions were justified by concern. But true concern doesn't lead to exploitation. It doesn't prioritize acquisition over care. It doesn't lie to a child about his grandmother's whereabouts." With that, I left them to consider their options and their choices, just as I was now free to consider mine. 6 months later, my garden was beginning to recover from the neglect it had suffered during my absence. New dahlia bulbs promised spring blooms, and the rose bushes had been carefully pruned back for winter. Inside, my house had gradually returned to being my home, redecorated not with designer trends, but with the comfortable furnishings and meaningful objects that told the story of my life. Catherine and Paul had accepted my terms, more out of necessity than contrition, I suspected. They remained in their riverside apartment, making monthly restitution payments and dutifully attending their community service hours at Elder Justice Alliance. The family counseling sessions with Miles were challenging but necessary, revealing layers of hurt and mistrust that would take time to address. Miles spent every weekend with me, working on college applications and advanced calculus problems, at my kitchen table. He had matured in ways both painful and profound, developing a keen awareness of ethical complexities and the consequences of choices. I grieved for the innocence he had lost, but admired the thoughtful young man emerging from that difficult education. As for me, I had found purpose beyond simply reclaiming my interrupted life. Barbara had introduced me to a network of elder rights advocates, and I had begun speaking at community forums about guardianship abuse and financial exploitation. My mathematics background proved unexpectedly valuable in helping other seniors understand and manage their finances to protect themselves from predatory practices. Most satisfying of all, I had established the Gladys Perkins Fund, named for my former roommate who remained at Lakeside Gardens despite my best efforts to find alternatives for her. The fund provided legal assistance to low-income seniors facing improper guardianship proceedings and supported improved training for facility staff on recognizing and reporting exploitation. Tamika had left Lakeside to become the fund's first program coordinator, bringing her compassion and insider knowledge of institutional care to our advocacy work. Together, we were developing protocols to help nursing staff identify residents at risk of exploitation and creating resources to support family members who wanted to provide genuine care rather than control. On a crisp December morning, I sat at my desk reviewing quarterly reports from Winter Investments when the doorbell rang. Opening the front door, I found Catherine standing on the porch, her posture uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mom," she greeted me awkwardly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Just paperwork," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Would you like some coffee?" She nodded, following me to the kitchen. We moved in uncomfortable silence as I prepared 2 cups, the familiar ritual highlighting how unfamiliar our relationship had become. "Miles says you're helping him with his MIT application," Catherine said finally, accepting her mug. "He's been working so hard on it." "He's exceptionally talented in mathematics," I replied. "The admissions committee will recognize that." Catherine traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "He also says you're doing some kind of advocacy work now, speaking at events about..." "What happened?" "Not about our specific situation," I clarified. "About the systemic issues that allow exploitation to occur. About how to recognize and prevent it." She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. After a long moment, she reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, placing it carefully on the table between us. "What's this?" I asked. "The final restitution payment," she answered, "plus a little extra, for the Gladys Perkins Fund." I considered the envelope without touching it. "Thank you for completing the payments. As for the donation, you should make that directly to the fund if that's your intention." "I will," Catherine said quickly. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand what we did, why we did it." She finally looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've been working with a therapist outside the required family sessions, trying to figure out how I became someone who could do that to her own mother." I remained silent, neither encouraging nor dismissing her. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, her voice strained but determined. "I'm not even sure I deserve it, but I want you to know that the community service hours, they're changing me. I'm working with elderly residents who have no family, no visitors, hearing their stories, seeing their loneliness. It's like looking through a window into what could have been your life if your plan hadn't worked." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Catherine had always been achievement-oriented, materially focused, concerned with appearances. These weren't new traits that had suddenly emerged to betray me. They were tendencies that had been present all along, amplified by circumstance and opportunity into something destructive. "Change is difficult," I said finally. "Real change, not just the performance of remorse." "I know," she nodded. "I'm trying anyway." We sat in silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee, the December sunlight casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. There was no miraculous reconciliation, no tearful embrace to instantly heal the breach between us. Instead, there was simply acknowledgement of harm done, of consequences accepted, of the long, uncertain road toward whatever relationship might eventually be possible. As Catherine prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Miles told me something that I can't stop thinking about. He said you never once during that whole time at Lakeside expressed hatred toward us, not even when you were planning your legal case. How is that possible? I considered her question carefully. Hatred requires energy I couldn't afford to spare. I needed all my resources focused on reclaiming my freedom and restoring my life. Besides, I added, meeting her gaze directly, hatred damages the vessel that contains it far more than the object it's directed toward. That's a mathematics lesson too, the conservation of emotional energy. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Always the teacher. Always, I agreed. After she left, I returned to my desk by the window, watching the winter birds at the feeder, in my backyard. Life after 72 had taken turns I never could have anticipated, some devastating, some unexpectedly enriching. The betrayal had altered me, certainly, but it hadn't defined me. Instead, it had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed and opened doors to purpose I might never otherwise have discovered. I opened my laptop and continued working on my presentation for next week's Elder Justice Conference. The title, slide displayed a simple question. Who defines your worth? Below it, I had placed a single line of text, not an answer, but an invitation to those who would listen. Not your age, not your bank account, not others' expectations, but the dignity with which you insist on living life on your own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.